What's up, Kings fans? Welcome to In the Pipeline, presented by SoCalGas. SoCalGas reminds you to call 811 2 days before digging. I'm your host, Jack Jablonski, and alongside me is Mr. All Things Kings Hockey, John Hoven, a.k.a. the Mayor. John, I'm excited to have you partnering with me for this episode, and hey, let's dive into the future of Kings hockey.
Yeah, for sure, Jabs. I'm excited. This is going to be fun. Nothing I like more than talking about Kings prospects.
So for today, we're going to talk about the Kings' deepest position in the prospect pool, and that's goaltending. For the first time in a while, the Kings have three goaltenders that have not only been in the news as of late, but that are all performing at a great level. And for that, we talk about Erik Portillo, Hampton Slukynsky, and Carter George. And we're going to start with the order that they were drafted in, even though the first one we're talking about was not drafted by the Kings, and that's Erik Portillo. Of course, we've seen him in a Kings uniform as of late. Talk to me a little bit about how Erik Portillo ended up in a Kings uniform.
Well, every prospect has their own story and their own tale, and Erik Portillo's is an interesting one. He almost quit hockey, actually. So during his junior days over in Frölunda, over in Sweden, he was concerned that he wasn't going to be getting the playing time. And so because of that, he was contemplating, hey, maybe I want to quit hockey and concentrate on my schooling. He's a very intelligent, very, very cerebral type person. He was convinced to stick with hockey. Of course, he came over to the U.S., spent 1 year in the USHL. His brother was there with him. That helped him sort of acclimate to America, learn English a little bit better, et cetera, and then ultimately ended up at the University of Michigan, which is where during that time period, as a Buffalo Sabres prospect, as you mentioned, sort of the same thing though. He's starting to see, hey, maybe I'm not going to get the playing time that I'm interested in, and so ultimately the trade happens and he ends up coming to Los Angeles. So soon after that trade, he ended up turning pro when his college career was over. Last year he was in Ontario, his first pro season with the Ontario Reign. There were 4 other goaltenders that were there with him last year as well. So by the end of the year, Portillo did what he always does, and he ended up taking over the starting job heading into the playoffs. Now you're looking at a player who he's in his second pro year. You made mention a moment ago that he made his pro debut. The expectation this year was that he would be the number 1 guy in Ontario, maybe get a couple of NHL games. So we've seen him at the NHL level, but who is he? Well, this is a guy he's a really fiery player. One of the things that Marco Sturm has pointed to is Jonathan Quick, which is really interesting because the two of them never crossed paths. A few days after Quick was traded out of Los Angeles is when they made the trade with Buffalo. So they were never in a training camp or anything together, but Portillo points to Jonathan Quick as somebody kind of like an absentee mentor, if you will. He's not around. He's not personally giving him tips about how to sort of calm things down a little bit during a game. But Marco Sturm has talked with him a lot about, hey, I played with Jonathan Quick. I also, coached Jonathan Quick or was here as a coach when Quick was with the LA Kings. And so it's been interesting to talk to Portillo and have him reference Jonathan Quick, somebody who he's never actually, shared a goaltending crease with, but that he's using him as sort of a mentor, if you will.
And for Adam Brown and his ability to help take all of these assets and, individual skills that Portillo has, it's been extremely impressive that it's all come together for him.
One of the things that I've been hearing from talking to scouts and coaches and things like that, and even Portillo himself, what they're working on and trying to get him to do is to be a little bit more contained, right? Because when he was in a lower tier of hockey, as a big guy, he can lean on his athleticism. We see this a lot with skaters as well. But with a goalie specifically, he's been free to range and to go wherever he really wants to go. And what they're trying to get him to do is be a little bit tighter, not leave the paint, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is in a game, if things aren't going necessarily well for him, muscle memory kicks in and he starts doing some of those things, sliding a little bit further side to side than maybe they would like him to. But the more that he's working with the coaching staff and they're developing that tighter system, if you will, the more that will become his muscle memory going forward. So it's interesting if you watch him sort of on a month-to-month basis in Ontario, you'll see the changes and see him playing a tighter, more compact game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you talk about the full control of their body, and it's interesting because I had a good conversation with Portillo when he got here a little bit after, and to see his development from when he, comes from Michigan, gets traded to the Kings, and now has had a year and change under his belt in the organization. He really credits Adam Brown, the goaltending coach of the Ontario Reign, for taking all of these individual skills and assets that he had to his game and being able to put it all together. As you mentioned, with the big goaltender, you've got long limbs, you've got to have your body under control, and that fiery, aggressive, attitude in between his ears is also something that he's been able to show within the game physically. And I think it was great for Kings fans to get a look at Erik Portillo on November 29th when he made his NHL debut with the Kings, because you could see that aggression. You could see him come out and challenge. And he made 28 saves on 29 shots and obviously picked up his first win. So no question that he's got a bright future. So we're going to transition into the next goaltender here, and that's going to be Hampton Slukynsky. And you talk about Portillo's journey. The journey for Hampton Slukynsky is just as unique, and it starts in War Road, Minnesota. And for anyone who doesn't know the history of hockey in War Road, Minnesota, or even where it is, because it's way up north. You go from Minneapolis and St. Paul, drive 6 hours north to the Canadian border, and that little ridge where it goes up, that's War Road, Minnesota. And population under 2,000, yet this place produces NHL hockey players, notable guys like TJ Oshie, Brock Nelson, Dave Christian from the 1980 Olympic team. Hampton Slukynsky is starting to edge his name into that category as he continues to play and wins wherever he goes. So for me, I think it's an extremely awesome story because you don't come from a lot, but something that I know that you and I were talking about is there wasn't a lot for him to work with when he was up there before he got going.
Yeah, it's crazy when you look at his stats, right? Because you mentioned him just being a winner, and whether it's high school, whether it's college, whether it's whatever program, wherever he is, he puts up incredible numbers.
Yeah.
And the beginning of his story is really about being self-taught. So this is a kid who wasn't getting a lot of coaching, small town, like you said, small area, not a lot of coaching available, but he wants it. He wants it so badly that he was willing to invest in himself as a teenager to go out and figure this thing out. So he's watching YouTube videos, and the most impressive thing to me, he goes out and buys a pitching machine. He's listening to a podcast, and some goalie talked about buying a pitching machine, and what Hammer, as they call him, everybody calls him Hammer. His brother nicknamed him that when he was a kid. So what Hammer ended up finding out once he bought this for himself for $50 was that the way that the little yellow ball comes out, it has a little bit of a curve to it. And so it was helping him from sort of figuring out where it's going to go. And to this day, he still uses that pitching machine. He uses it every day. He practices with it all the time. The biggest thing that I was interested in, you always watch these prospects when they move up a level, right? Mm-hmm. AHL is better than junior. NHL is better than AHL. When you're moving up to that next level, quicker, faster, better, et cetera, how do they respond? Well, for me, with Hampton, it was about how is he going to respond to coaching? Because he was going from that high school environment where he's putting up crazy numbers. I think in his senior year, he only lost one game, right? And it was a double overtime game or something ridiculous.
Yeah, the state championship.
Yeah,
it burns. If you talk to him, it burns. But yeah, exactly.
So you're putting up these great numbers, right? And you're doing it with, you're getting some coaching because obviously he had a coach, right?
Yeah.
But when you go to the USHL, and now you're going to one of the best teams in the USHL, you're going to get better coaching. And how is he going to respond? Well, the kid ends up winning goaltender of the year in the USHL. So he was responding to the coaching. He was open to the coaching. He said he really wanted to get more coaching. And now he's at Western Michigan, which is a top 10 program in the country, another good school, and he's responding to the coaching as well. So I think it's one of the reasons that the Kings coaches, the development staff, have really fallen in love with this kid when he's been here for a development camp.
Yeah, you talked about winning, and I want to make sure I get these numbers right because it is truly insane what this guy has done. So high school senior year, he goes 28-1-1. USHL rookie, he goes to Fargo, wins goaltender of the year, wins the championship, the Clark Cup, goes 37-6 in his first year, and now he's 3-2-2 with a 1.8 goals against. That equals 68-9-3 over the last 3 seasons that he's been a goaltender. So
I loved when you gave me the cumulative stat the other day, by the way. It's so much more impressive when you think about what he's done over the last 24 months. And don't forget the, the award that he won when he was in high school, too.
Yeah,
it's the
goaltender, Mr. Minnesota goaltender of the year, USHL goalie of the year. He's just leading and doing everything. And you talked about the goalie coach. Never really had one. His first goalie coach, I got to talk to him a few times last year in Fargo. His name's Carter Creer, and super complimentary of him. He actually was scouting him for Fargo and got to know him through Hampton's older brother, who's also on Western Michigan. So he knew how to deal with him. They have a great relationship. They still talk to this day. And he talks about how his best asset and what separates him apart from so many others is his athleticism. You talked about the comparison with Jonathan Quick and Erik Portillo mentally. The comparison for Jonathan Quick is the oh bleep, how did he make that save? His ability to just react, flexibility, and read the play is something that really sets him apart. So going from a guy that checks all of your boxes in Hammer, I'm going to go to a guy that checks all of my boxes in Carter George. Now, he had an extremely eventful 8 months, and he's raised a lot of eyebrows in a very good way since the Kings have drafted him. We talk about development camp, the rookie tournament, and even into training camp this year. He gets into a game before he gets sent back to the Owen Sound attack. Now, unlike Hampton Slukynsky, Carter George's numbers don't look as good as the other two guys, and that's because he's on a very young OHL team, the youngest in the league, and then on top of that, you've got 3 brand new coaches in what is a little bit of a rebuilding year for the organization in Owen Sound. So that's the unfortunate part, but the stats to me aren't what's important here. It's what everyone is saying about him.
Also, if you put some of those stats aside and you just look at the body of work, now they're dev camps, they're rookie games, etc. But in his time with Los Angeles, if you didn't know anything about his stats, you would have been very impressed if you watched those games at Dev Camp, the scrimmages, and if you watched the rookie tournament that was held here at TSPC. But from a size perspective, that's probably what throws a little bit of people off, because some people like to refer to him as a smaller goalie. Well, he's not really small. Matter of fact, he was 6'1" at the draft. More recently, I've heard that he's been measured at 6'1.5". So we're talking about a half-inch difference. If he was 6'2", nobody would be talking about him as a small goalie, and he probably would have been taken in the first round instead of the second round. And the Kings were sweating it a little bit, trying to wait for him to get to their slot in that second round. Remember, they also entered the day at the draft not having a second-round pick, so they were really excited the way that everything worked out, and they had a second-round pick, and they were able to take George, which, if you follow the pattern of Mark Yannetti and his draft record over the last 15-plus years with the Kings, he doesn't like to draft goalies in the second round. So that should right there tell you how special Carter George is, that they were willing to take him that high. He's a great skater, something I think you might want to dip into a little bit as you talk about the X's and O's more of him as a player. But he has that it factor. And my story about the it factor, and I've told this a few other times as well, what was so interesting to me is it's a phrase that you don't hear all the time scouts use. But in talking to a scout earlier that morning, prior to the Kings taking him, that was the phrase that a scout outside the organization talked about was, hey, this kid has the it factor. And then lo and behold, when we talked to Mark Yannetti after the draft that day at the podium, he used that phrase as well. He has that it factor. So he might be smaller, but he plays bigger in the way he takes up the net, and the save percentage is there. It doesn't matter if it's a 1-0 game or if it's a 6-5 game. He's going to get the job done because he's just focused on winning any way possible.
Yeah, you talk about the X's and O's, and I want to dive into that a little bit because there's 2 parts. There's the Carter George that plays the puck, and then there's the Carter George that stops the puck. And, we'll begin with the one that was in the news, and that's the one who plays the puck. Because, of course, you look back at mid-November, and Carter George nails a goalie goal, becoming the 11th goalie in OHL history to score a goalie goal. And I had a great conversation with him after he scored the goal. And he was talking about how this all started back when he was about 7 or 8 years old. And it's because he had a coach that, to put it politely, when the third and fourth line was on the ice, they weren't ever in his end of the zone because they were stuck in the other end. And the coach just said, play the puck, go practice this. And he had that coach for about 4 or 5 years in a row who allowed him to build that confidence. And then he was, you fast forward to today, and he was talking about how in practice now, he still practices in-game situations. And I don't mean just, breaking the puck out to the defenseman and getting it, maybe, springing a forward for a 2-on-1 if the other team is changing, but also goalie goal situations. If the team rings the puck with an empty net, he, goes around the net, grabs it, and then tries to fire it down. So it's interesting. On top of that conversation, we also talked to Dale DeGray, the general manager of Owen Sound, and he called this earlier in the summer. And he said, again, when we were talking to him after the goalie goal, he said, I wouldn't be surprised if he does it again. Now, we transition over to the aspect of stopping the puck, which is very, very important. Some would say more important than
for
scoring.
A goalie, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably the most important.
And you talk about 6'1", and his ability to read the play and his IQ is off the charts. And that's, I think, something that Mark Yannetti was so joyed with when they got to him in that second round, because he is 6'1", but he plays bigger because of his positioning and his ability to read the play. Someone I think he plays a lot alike in a comp would be Henrik Lundqvist. You think of Henrik Lundqvist as a bigger goalie. Henrik Lundqvist is only 6'1". So that's the type of guy I can kind of see him becoming in terms of just being able to be where he needs to be, present himself as a bigger player, and so on. So no question, all three of these guys have a great track record. On top of that, a lot of excitement for Kings fans to be able to see the growth and development of an area that the Kings fans have long wanted to build that next Jonathan Quick, who could be here for a decade and so on, and obviously lead the team to glory. But John Hoven, the mayor, appreciate you being my co-partner here, and that's going to be all for In the Pipeline, presented by SoCalGas.
In the Pipeline is presented by SoCalGas. SoCalGas reminds us to call 811 2 days before digging.